After witnessing my own daughter attempting to sell my mansion behind my back to pay for her $500,000 wedding, I knew I had lost a daughter, but found my dignity. Subscribe now, because what happened next will forever change how you view family relationships. After 23 desperate calls from my daughter that day, I knew I had made the right decision. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to immediately respond to her demands. Each vibration was like an echo of all the times I had rushed to solve her problems, to open my wallet, to sacrifice my peace for her momentary happiness. I sat on the couch in my living room, yes, my living room, in my mansion, and observed the family photos hanging on the walls. In each one, I appeared smiling, proud, believing I was building beautiful memories with my only daughter. How naive I was. For years, I confused being used with being loved. For years, I paid to receive the affection that should be free. The phone kept ringing. This time, it was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but something told me to answer. It was my daughter's boyfriend sobbing on the other end. Sir, forgive me, I didn't know. She told me you had given your consent to sell the mansion. I thought it was your decision. And there I was, listening to apologies from a man who wasn't even family, while my own daughter had tried to scam her own father. But for you to understand why that call was so important, why those 23 previous calls didn't move me an inch from my decision, I need to tell you how I got to that point. I need to tell you the story of a father who learned perhaps too late the difference between unconditional love and being an emotional ATM. For 32 years, I believed that being a good father meant always saying yes. I believed my worth as a person was measured by my ability to solve Isabella's problems, by the speed with which I could pull out my wallet when she called me crying. Each tear of hers was an order for me. Each daddy I need was an emergency that required my immediate attention and, of course, my money. But that day, when I discovered she had been showing my mansion to potential buyers, telling them I had already given my consent for the sale, something broke inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the awakening. It was realizing that to her I wasn't her father. I was simply an obstacle between her and the money she needed for her perfect wedding. The mansion I bought with the sweat of my double shifts, the mansion where she grew up, where I taught her to walk, where we celebrated her first birthdays. To her, it was nothing more than a commercial transaction. When I finally confronted her that morning, her response finished waking me up. Dad, it's just a mansion. You can buy another smaller one. My wedding is once in a lifetime. Just a mansion. 30 years of mortgage. Sacrifices, building a home reduced to just a mansion. But what hurt me most weren't her words, but the naturalness with which she said them, as if it were obvious that I should sacrifice my patrimony for her whim. Right there, in that moment, I decided something that would change everything forever. I decided to value myself as much as I had valued her all these years. My father always taught me that family came first, but he forgot to teach me that this should be reciprocal. I grew up in a modest house where personal sacrifice was seen as virtue. My mother worked cleaning offices until late hours, while my father held 2 jobs to support us. They were my example of total dedication, of unconditional love, translated into sweat and tears. A man is measured by what he's capable of doing for his family, my father repeated. Those words were engraved so deeply in my soul that they became my life philosophy. Unfortunately, I completely misinterpreted their meaning. For decades, I believed that loving meant giving without receiving, that being a good father implied becoming an inexhaustible source of resources without expecting recognition. My parents sacrificed, yes, but there was reciprocity in their marriage. There was mutual gratitude. There was respect. What I developed with Isabella was something completely different. A unilateral relationship, where I gave and she took, where I wore myself out and she grew more demanding. When my wife died, Isabella was barely 12 years old. I became mother and father simultaneously, assuming roles I didn't know how to perform. Every decision I made, thinking about not failing her, compensating for her mother's absence, being enough for two. Perhaps that's where my mistake began, trying to fill an emotional void with material provision. I vividly remember the first expensive gift I bought her after her mother's funeral. It was a pink bicycle I had seen in a sports store window. It cost more than I could afford, but her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since we lost my wife. In that moment, I associated her happiness with my ability to provide expensive things, a fatal error that would mark the next 20 years of our relationship. My upbringing had taught me solid values: hard work, honesty, responsibility, but no one had prepared me to raise a teenage daughter alone in an increasingly materialistic world. Every "I can't buy you that" felt like another loss for her, as if I were failing her again after not being able to save her mother. My parents gave, but they also demanded respect and gratitude. I only gave, expecting love to come naturally as a consequence. During her university years, I worked extra shifts to pay for her private education, her study trips, her apartment near campus. Each sacrifice I made with joy, imagining the day she would graduate and thank me for having given her opportunities I never had. But graduation came, and instead of gratitude, I received new requests: a better car, a trip to Europe, money for the deposit on her first independent apartment. When she turned 25, I had already spent more money on her than what my parents had spent on my entire education and youth combined. But while I had left my parents' house with emotional tools and solid values, she left mine with disproportionate expectations and a total inability to value others' effort. Every cent invested in her was an investment in our future together. Or at least, that's what I told myself during the insomniac dawns, when I reviewed my bank accounts and saw how the red numbers multiplied. Since I became a widower, every financial decision revolved around a simple question: will this make Isabella happy? During her adolescence, I developed a routine that I now recognize as self-destructive. I worked the morning shift at the textile factory. I quickly ate lunch in my car and then headed to my second job at the warehouse until 10 p.m. Weekends I cleaned offices to generate extra income. All this effort had a single purpose: maintaining the standard of living I considered appropriate for a responsible widower's daughter. When she turned 16, her private school friends started receiving cars as birthday gifts. Of course, Isabella also needed hers. I worked 6 months of overtime to gather the down payment money. I vividly remember the day I handed her the keys. Her hug lasted exactly 3 seconds before she ran off to show it to her friends. That night, while she celebrated with her classmates, I stayed awake, calculating how I would pay the next 24 monthly payments. Her university years were a constant parade of financial emergencies. Each semester brought new, unforeseen expenses: specialized books that cost hundreds of dollars, research projects that required sophisticated equipment, academic trips that were absolutely essential for her professional formation. I never questioned any of these requests because I had associated her academic success with my success as a father. What hurts me most to remember are the phone conversations from that era. They always started the same way: "Dad, how are you?" immediately followed by, "I need you to help me with something urgent." Over time, I stopped waiting for the first words of courtesy. I knew each call came accompanied by a specific monetary figure and an immovable deadline. During her last university year, she asked me for money for a graduation trip to Europe with her career classmates. The cost was equivalent to 3 months of my salary. When I explained I couldn't afford such an amount all at once, her response left me cold. "Dad, All my friends are going. You can't embarrass me like this. Take out a loan if necessary. Finally, I gave in, not to the loan, but to emptying my emergency savings account. While she toured European museums uploading photos to her social media, I ate instant noodles for dinner and cancelled my dental insurance to compensate for the expense. But each photo of her smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower made me feel the sacrifice was worth it. How wrong I was. After graduation, I got a better-paying job and thought we could finally stabilize our economic situation. Monumental error. Her university degree didn't come accompanied by financial independence, but by even higher expectations. Now, she needed an apartment appropriate for a professional, suitable clothes for the work environment, a car that projected business seriousness. When she started working, instead of contributing to family expenses, she used her salary for personal expenses while I continued covering all her basic needs. Her reasoning was simple. Dad, I'm just starting my career. I need to establish myself first. Establishing herself apparently meant living like a princess while her father wore himself out, maintaining a lifestyle that not even he could afford. The few attempts I made to establish financial limits were received with devastating emotional blackmail. After everything we've been through together, now you're going to deny me your support. Mom would never have let me go through this situation. Using my deceased wife's memory as an emotional weapon should have been my definitive red line, but even that manipulation I allowed. For 22 years, I built a dynamic where my value as a father was measured exclusively by my ability to provide. I never taught her the value of money because I myself had lost perspective of what it meant to earn it with effort. Now I understand that every financial yes I gave her was a no to my own well-being, to my future, to my dignity. The signals were all there, but I chose to interpret them as love. For years, I mentally kept a collection of moments that I now recognize as clear signs of disrespect, but that at the time I rationalized as normal behaviors of an independent young woman. The first time I really should have realized was during her 20th birthday. I had organized a family dinner at her favorite restaurant, an elegant place where a meal for 2 people cost more than I earned in 2 days. Throughout the evening, she was absorbed in her phone, responding to messages, taking photos for her social media, basically ignoring everyone present. When it came time for toasts, she briefly stood up, muttered a thanks to everyone without looking up from her phone, and sat down again. I had spent almost a month's salary on that celebration. That same night, while I washed dishes after everyone left, I overheard by chance a phone conversation she was having with a friend. "It was okay," she said, referring to her party. "Although I would have preferred something more exclusive. My dad always chooses such normal places." Normal places. The most expensive restaurant I had been to in my life was normal for her. But what really marked me weren't her words about the place, but the tone with which she spoke about me. There was no affection, no gratitude, no recognition. She spoke about me as she would speak about an employee who had performed his functions in a mediocre way. The months that followed brought more evidence that I continued ignoring. When her friends came to the house, I became invisible. They passed by me without greeting, used the kitchen without asking permission, left messes without cleaning, and she never corrected them, never defended me, never established limits about how they should behave in my house. One afternoon, I arrived early from work and found 3 of her friends in the living room, having rearranged the furniture to create better atmosphere for their photos. They had moved my favorite armchair to an uncomfortable corner. When I gently asked them to return it to its place, one of them looked at me with evident annoyance and said, "It's just that it gets in the way of the lighting." I waited for Isabella's intervention, But her response was worse than silence. She laughed. She laughed at my discomfort and said, "Oh, Dad, don't be dramatic. It's just a piece of furniture." Just a piece of furniture. The armchair where her mother and I had spent thousands of nights watching. Movies where she herself had slept when she was little and had nightmares, where we had celebrated her first academic achievements. The difference in her treatment toward other people began to become more evident. When we visited my brothers, she was charming with my sisters-in-law, helped them in the kitchen, was interested in their conversations, treated them with a courtesy I never received. With boyfriends, something similar happened. She transformed when there were male visitors at home, becoming attentive, considerate, even affectionate with me in front of them. But as soon as they left, she returned to her usual treatment, functional indifference. For a long time, I interpreted these differences as shyness or as her way of protecting our family intimacy. But the truth was much simpler and more painful. She knew exactly how to behave when it suited her, and with me, it didn't suit her to pretend respect because she already had everything guaranteed without effort. When Isabella turned 26 and began talking about investments in her future, her conversations had evolved from simple money requests to true psychological pressure sessions. "Dad, you need to understand that this isn't an expense, it's an investment. If you don't support me now, I'll never be able to pay you back for everything you've done for me." The manipulation had become sophisticated. Each "no" from me was received with statistics about successful parents who unconditionally supported their adult children. During those months, she developed a particularly cruel technique: constant comparison with other parents. Mariana's dad lent her money to open her boutique, and now she earns more than him, she told me while reviewing my bank statement without my permission. Sophia's dad mortgaged his house for her business, and now they live in a mansion. The pressure escalated when she met Marcus, her future fiancé. He came from a wealthy family, and from the first moment, Isabella completely changed. Her life expectations. Suddenly, everything we had built together was insufficient for the new version of herself she wanted to project. She needed an apartment in a more exclusive area, a car that wouldn't embarrass her in front of his family, designer clothes for social meetings. "Dad, I can't arrive at his parents' house in my current car. They'll realize I'm not at their level," she explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. When I responded that a car doesn't define in person's value, I was met with a look of pity, as if I were an old man who didn't understand how the modern world worked. Family visits became exhibition sessions where I was the background prop. When Marcus came to dinner, Isabella transformed our modest house into a carefully staged scenario. She brought out the china we only used on special occasions. She bought expensive wine with my money. She prepared elaborate meals that I ended up paying for, but that she presented as her culinary specialties. During those dinners, I became the perfect father of a prosperous family. She talked about our future plans, our joint projects, how we had worked hard to get where we were. Marcus saw me as a successful man who had known how to educate an exceptional daughter. The reality was that I worked 60 hours weekly to maintain that illusion of prosperity she needed to impress her boyfriend. When Marcus proposed marriage, the demands reached stratospheric levels. The wedding had to be perfect, because it would be the first impression his family would have of our social class. Every element of the ceremony became a negotiation where I put up the money and she made the decisions. From the venue to the menu, from decoration to music, everything had to meet the standard of Marcus's family. "It's your only daughter, Dad. You only get married once," became her favorite phrase every time I questioned any expense. When I mentioned that the budget had already exceeded my possibilities, her response was chilling. "Well, then we'll have to be creative with finances." Being creative meant mortgaging my mansion. Being creative meant liquidating my retirement fund. Being creative meant converting my life's patrimony into funding for her dream wedding. And when I expressed my reservations, her final argument was demolishing. "Dad, after everything we've invested in getting to this point, you can't back out now. It would be wasting all those years of work." All those years of work. My work, my sweat, my sacrifice. But in her narrative, it had been a joint investment where we had both bet on the same future. The difference was that I had bet my entire life, and she had only bet her ability to ask me for more. The emotional manipulation reached its lowest point when she began using my wife's memory as a weapon. "Mum would have wanted me to have the perfect wedding," she told me with calculated tears in her eyes. "She always dreamed of seeing me married in a beautiful ceremony." Using the memory of my lost love to justify exorbitant expenses should have been my absolute limit, but even that I allowed. During the months of wedding preparation, I developed chronic insomnia. I spent nights awake, calculating numbers, looking for ways to generate the money she needed, exploring financial options that compromised my future. While I lost weight and health from stress, she flourished, planning her perfect day with my money. The moment I realized I had completely lost control of the situation was when she brought an appraiser to evaluate my mansion without consulting me. "I just wanted to know how much we could get if we decided to sell it," she explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My mansion, my home, my only patrimony had been reduced to a figure on paper to finance her matrimonial fantasy. The proposal came accompanied by a list, literally a printed list with detailed costs, deadlines, and my name assigned to each item as financial. Responsible. Marcus had asked for her hand on a Tuesday, and the following Friday she appeared in my living room with a folder that contained what seemed like a business plan for the most expensive wedding in family history. "Dad, sit down. We need to talk about my future," she announced with a seriousness I hadn't seen since she was a child talking about her school projects. But this time, the project was my economic ruin disguised as family celebration. The first number I saw took my breath. Away, $500,000. $500,000 for an 8-hour party. Her presentation was impeccable. She had researched prices, compared options, even prepared graphs showing the return on investment of an elegant wedding versus a modest ceremony. According to her analysis, an expensive wedding was an investment in social networking that would open professional doors for her and establish the foundations of her new matrimonial life in the correct social stratum. "Look, Dad, Marcus's family is accustomed to a certain level. If we do something small, they'll think we don't value this union enough," she explained, while turning pages full of photographs of event halls that cost more per night than my annual salary. Family pressure began immediately. Marcus, who until then had been polite but distant with me, suddenly became my best friend. He invited me to dinner, asked about my work, even offered me professional contacts that could help me increase my income for the wedding. His sudden interest in my well-being was transparent. He needed to ensure I would be capable of financing the ceremony he expected. Marcus's parents also joined the campaign. During a family dinner at their house, his father spoke to me as an equal for the first time, sharing anecdotes about wedding expenses of his other children, normalizing astronomical figures as if they were obvious family investments. "A man only marries off his daughter once," he told me with a pat on the shoulder. "You have to do it right." Isabella had orchestrated a social manipulation campaign where the entire extended family pressured me to demonstrate my paternal love through my spending capacity. Every family conversation ended with comments about beautiful weddings they had seen. Every meeting included casual stories about generous parents who had done everything possible for their daughter's happiness. The veiled threats began when I expressed my first real doubts about the budget. "Dad, I hope you're not going to disappoint me after so many years," she told me one afternoon when I suggested more economical alternatives. "Marcus is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. If his family thinks we can't maintain his level, this could affect our relationship." The implication was clear. If I didn't adequately finance her wedding, I would be responsible for ruining her marriage. Her matrimonial happiness was conditioned on my ability to economically impress strangers who would probably forget the ceremony details in 6 months. When I tried to talk to her about more modest alternatives, her reaction was devastating. "Modest alternatives? Dad, are you ashamed of me? Don't I deserve to have a beautiful wedding after all these years being an exemplary daughter?" Exemplary daughter, that was the phrase that hurt me most, because it made me realize that her definition of being exemplary had nothing to do with love, respect, or gratitude, but with her ability to extract resources from me. The pressure escalated when she began showing me photographs of her friends' weddings. "Look how beautiful Carla looked at her ceremony," she said while scrolling through images on her phone. "Her dad spent $400,000, but look what precious memories they created." Each wedding was a tacit competition, each ceremony a yardstick with which to measure my paternal commitment. The following months became a constant negotiation where I put up practical objections and she responded with emotional blackmail. When I mentioned my concerns about my financial future, she responded that a father who truly loves his daughter doesn't think about money at moments like these. When I spoke about the possibility of a more intimate ceremony, she accused me of wanting to ruin the most important moment of her life. Marcus began visiting us more frequently, but now his visits had a specific purpose: supervising the financing progress. He asked casually about preparations, reviewed pending lists, even offered help finding the best financing options for an event of that magnitude. His help consisted of connecting me with lenders who could use my mansion as collateral. The culmination of this escalation came when Isabella presented me with the final contracts to sign. Event halls, catering, decoration, photography, music, dresses, flowers, transportation. Each service required my signature as financial responsible. While I reviewed the documents, she sat next to me with a radiant smile talking about our big day, as if I were the one getting married. "Dad, you're going to be so proud when you see everything ready," she told me, while I mentally calculated how many years of work it would take me to pay for all this. "Everyone will know what kind of father you are when they see this celebration." The pride she imagined for me was based exclusively on my debt capacity, not on the quality of our relationship, nor on her growth as a person. That night, after signing the first batch of contracts, I stayed awake, reviewing my real financial situation. The figures were terrifying. To fulfill all the obligations I had assumed, I would have to liquidate my savings, mortgage my mansion, and work until I was 75. All for an 8-hour party that would impress people I didn't know and who wouldn't think about us again after that night. The following 8 months were a downward spiral of requests that multiplied like a financial hydra. Every time I managed to cover an expense from the list, 3 new indispensable details appeared that no one had mentioned before. Isabella had become a project director whose only job was finding creative ways to empty my bank account. "Dad, I just realized we need to hire a wedding coordinator," she announced one morning, while I drank my morning coffee before going to work. "The organizer I hired says it's impossible to manage everything without a professional assistant." An assistant for the assistant, $75,000 additional to supervise the other expenses that were already ruining me. Each conversation began with "I just realized," or "It turns out it's mandatory," or "Elegant weddings include this." Her vocabulary had evolved toward a business jargon where exorbitant expenses sounded like inevitable logical decisions. "We're talking about the image of the entire family," was her standard response when I questioned any cost. My routine transformed into something surreal. I worked 12 hours daily at the factory. I returned home to find new bills waiting for me on the table and spent nights looking for ways to generate additional income. I began selling personal belongings, my father's tool collection, the watch my wife had given me for our 10th anniversary. I even considered selling my car and using public transportation. Marcus had practically moved into our house during this period, but not to help with expenses, but to supervise that everything was up to family expectations. He sat in my living room using my Wi-Fi, eating my food while reviewing quotes and approving expenses with my money. When I suggested he could also contribute economically, his response was diplomatic but firm. "In my family, it's tradition for the bride's father to cover ceremonial expenses." Tradition, a tradition they had invented specifically for this occasion. My health began to deteriorate visibly. Constant stress had taken away my appetite. I developed stomach ulcers, and my blood pressure shot to dangerous levels. When my doctor recommended reducing work stress, I had to explain that I couldn't afford to work fewer hours because I had financial commitments to fulfill. His expression of concern made me reflect on the absurdity of my situation. I was literally killing myself to pay for a party. The refusals became harder to sustain because Isabella had perfected the art of emotional manipulation. "Dad, if we can't do this right, I prefer to cancel everything and get married civilly," she told me with perfectly calculated tears. "I don't want Marcus's family to think we're poor." The cancellation threat was her nuclear weapon. After having invested so much money, could I allow everything to be in vain? Marcus developed his own precious strategy. He began talking to me about business opportunities that could help me recover the investment after the wedding. Vague plans about real estate investments, commercial partnerships, projects that sounded promising but required initial capital I didn't have. The weekends became marathons of tests and decisions where I was only consulted to approve expenses, never to give opinions about tastes or preferences. "Do you like this centerpiece better or this other one?" Isabella asked me, showing options that differed in price by $5,000, but that looked identical to me. My function was to be a financial approval stamp, not a father with valid opinions. The difference in treatment became more evident during meetings with vendors. When we were alone, Isabella spoke to me with impatience, as if I were a bureaucratic obstacle in the process of getting what she wanted. But when service vendors arrived, she transformed into the loving and proud daughter. "My dad wants us to have the best," she told them while taking my arm theatrically. "He's always been very generous with me." Generous. That word had become a euphemism for easy to exploit. My generosity wasn't seen as paternal love, but as a personality trait she could use to her benefit. During a particularly expensive meeting with the florist, something broke inside me. We were discussing arrangements that cost more than my monthly salary when Isabella casually commented, "My dad doesn't care about the price when it comes to my happiness." The naturalness with which she disposed of my money, the security with which she spoke for me, the way she reduced years of my work to her momentary whim, filled me with an anger I had never felt before. "Excuse me," I said, interrupting the conversation. "I need to review my numbers before making decisions." "About these arrangements," Isabella looked at me surprised. It was the first time in months I had put a pause to her plans. "Dad, what's wrong with you? We had already agreed on this," she told me with a tense smile that didn't fool anyone. That night, we had our first real confrontation about the budget. I showed her my accounts, my debts, the mathematical reality of what she was asking. Her response was chilling. Dad, we're too far along to back out now. You'll have to find a way. You'll have to find a way. Not, we'll find. Not, let's look for alternatives. Not, let's reconsider priorities. I had to find a way to make her impossible fantasy possible. When I suggested reducing some expenses or looking for more economical options, her reaction was nuclear. You know what, Dad? If you can't afford to be the father I need for my wedding, maybe you should have thought about that before having a daughter. Her words were like a slap that woke me from years of blind complacence. For the first time in decades, I realized I had created a monster that saw me solely as a means to her ends. But I was still missing discovering how far she was willing to go to get her perfect wedding. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday morning that would change my life forever. I was preparing to go to work when I found a stranger in my living room measuring windows and taking photographs of every room. Isabella was next to him, showing him the mansion with a naturalness that froze my blood. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," the stranger greeted me, extending his hand. "I'm Carlos Martinez, real estate agent. Your daughter contacted me to do a preliminary evaluation of the property." Preliminary evaluation. The words resonated in my head like funeral bells. My own daughter had invited an appraiser to my mansion without consulting me, as if the property were no longer mine. "Dad, we need to talk," she told me, with that voice she had perfected for difficult situations, half sweetness, half determination. "Please, sit down." But I didn't sit. I stood by the door, feeling like an intruder in my own home, while the real estate agent continued taking notes about my mansion. "Dad, I've been thinking about creative solutions for the budget issue," she began with a professional tone that I found more terrifying than if she had screamed. "The mansion is appraised at approximately $1,000. If we sell it, we can buy something smaller in the suburbs and use the difference for the wedding. And to give you initial capital for retirement." Initial capital for retirement. She had converted my forced displacement from my home into a retirement plan I supposedly needed. The manipulation had reached levels of psychological sophistication that left me speechless for several eternal minutes. "Besides," she continued while the appraiser kept working as if I didn't exist, "Marcus found a perfect house for you in a senior living complex. It has included services, free maintenance, and it's close to the shopping center where you could get a less physically demanding job." A less demanding job, a house for senior citizens. Isabella had planned not only to sell my home, but also to completely redesign my future life to accommodate her $500,000 wedding. The real estate agent nodded professionally, as if these conversations were routine in his work. "It's quite reasonable, actually," the appraiser intervened, addressing me. "I've seen many families make similar transitions. Parents free up capital for children's important projects and move to more manageable housing. It's a very common financial strategy nowadays." Financial strategy. My displacement had become a modern trend I should embrace with gratitude. Marcus appeared at that moment as if his entrance had been choreographed, with colorful brochures of small houses and communities for active adults over 55. "Mr. Thompson, look what interesting options we found," he told me, extending the brochures with a smile that pretended to be reassuring. "These communities are designed specifically for people in your life stage. No maintenance worries, organized social activities, 24-hour security. Your life stage." At 58 years old, according to them, my life stage no longer included owning my own house or having control over my financial decisions. It was time for downsizing to facilitate the new generation's dreams. "And what if I say no?" I finally asked, breaking the silence I had maintained while processing the magnitude of what they were proposing. The question fell like a bomb in the carefully orchestrated room. The appraiser stopped writing. Marcus fell silent. Isabella looked at me as if I had said something incomprehensible. "Dad, why would you say no?" she responded with a confused smile. "It's the perfect solution for everyone. You would have fewer responsibilities. We could have our wedding and everyone wins." Everyone wins. Everyone wins, except the man who would lose his home, his patrimony, and his dignity. "It's just a mansion, Dad," she continued with that phrase that had become her justifying mantra. "Mansions can be replaced. Memories are in people, not in walls. But those walls contained 30 years of my life, the memory of my deceased wife, every corner where I had raised Isabella, every improvement I had made with my own hands." Marcus approached, placing a paternal hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Thompson, I understand it's difficult at first, but think about it. No mortgage, no maintenance, no worries. You could enjoy your golden years without the stress of such a large property." Golden years, as if stripping me of my patrimony were a retirement gift I should be grateful for. "Besides," Isabella added with renewed enthusiasm, "imagine how proud Mom would be seeing my perfect wedding. She always wanted me to have everything best." There she was again, using my wife's memory as justification for robbing me of everything we had built together. The decisive moment came, when the appraiser began explaining the next steps of the selling process, speaking to me as if the decision had already been made. "We could have the property on the market by Friday," he said, while taking more photographs. "With the current market, I calculate we'd have offers in 2 weeks. "Stop," I said with a voice I didn't recognize as mine. "Stop, right there." The three looked at me, surprised. "This is my mansion. I decide if it sells or not. I decide if I move or not. And I decide how much I'm willing to spend on a wedding." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, I had established a clear limit. For the first time in decades, I had put my needs at the same level as hers. The appraiser uncomfortably put away his notebook. Marcus stepped back, and Isabella looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Genuine surprise. "Dad, what's wrong with you?" she asked with a trembling voice. "I thought we could resolve this as a family." As a family, but in her definition of family, I was the only one who sacrificed while the others made decisions about my life. "No," I repeated more firmly. "I'm not going to sell my mansion. I'm not going to move, and I'm not going to mortgage my future for a $500,000 wedding." Each no felt like recovering a piece of my dignity I had lost in years of blind complacence. Her reaction was immediate and devastating. "Then you won't have a daughter. Then you won't have a daughter." Her words hung in the air like a family death sentence. The appraiser quickly excused himself and left the house, dragging with him the professional atmosphere that had kept the conversation civilized until that moment. Marcus mumbled something about giving them space to resolve this as a family and disappeared toward the kitchen, leaving us alone for the final confrontation. Isabella looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in her eyes. For 30 eternal seconds, I waited for her to take back her words, to say. She had spoken in a moment of frustration to recognize the madness of what she had just declared, but her silence confirmed she had said it completely seriously. "Perfect," I responded with a calm that surprised me. "If that's your decision, I'll have to learn to live without a daughter who only values me for my bank account." My response left her petrified. She had clearly expected her final threat to make me give in like all the previous ones, that the prospect of losing her would force me to mortgage my mansion and my future. She left home that same afternoon. There was no dramatic door slam or farewell tears. She simply packed her belongings with business efficiency, as if she were vacating an office after quitting a job. Marcus helped her load her suitcases, carefully avoiding my gaze. Before leaving, she turned toward me one last time. "I hope you're happy with your decision, Dad." She told me with a tone that pretended to be dignified, but sounded more like the calculated tantrum of an adult who hadn't heard no enough in her life. When you regret it, maybe it'll be too late to fix this. When you regret it. Not if you regret it, but when. Her confidence that I would eventually give in was absolute. For 26 years I had reinforced that expectation by giving in to each of her demands, teaching her that all my refusals were temporary, that all my objections were negotiable. The door closed behind them with a definitive sound. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the deepest silence I had experienced in decades. It was strange. I'd spent years mentally complaining that I never had time for myself, and suddenly I had all the time in the world. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like abandonment. The first hours were the hardest. Every noise in the house made me turn around, expecting to see her return with an apology, or at least with a more reasonable explanation. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart accelerated, thinking it was her calling to make peace. But the calls were from wedding vendors asking about pending payments, from family members who had heard rumors about problems between us, from friends who wanted to confirm if the ceremony was still on. Marcus called me the next day, not to apologize or mediate, but to clarify the status of the signed contracts. His tone was completely professional, as if he had never dined at my table or pretended interest in my work anecdotes. "Mr. Thompson, I understand there are family differences, but we need to know if vendors should proceed with preparations or if we should consider cancellations." "Cancel everything," I responded without hesitation. "I'm not going to pay for a wedding I'm apparently not invited to." His silence on the other end confirmed they had expected a different response. They had bet that my paternal love would eventually overcome my financial common sense. The following days brought a cascade of cancellations that cost me a fortune in contractual penalties. Each call to a vendor was a small humiliation where I had to explain that irreconcilable family differences had arisen. The vendors were professionally understanding, but clearly annoyed by the losses my decision caused them. Social pressure began immediately. My sisters called me in turns, each with a slightly different version of the same message. "Richard, you have to fix this. She's your only daughter. Families forgive each other. You can't let pride ruin the most important relationship in your life." Each conversation ended with them taking her side, explaining that I was being stubborn and selfish for not selling my mansion. What hurt me most was the ease with which everyone had accepted the narrative that I was the villain of this story. For them, a father who refused to sell his patrimony for an expensive wedding was automatically guilty of any family rupture that followed. 3 months after our breakup, Marcus appeared at my door at 11 p.m. His appearance was devastating, swollen eyes, wrinkled clothes, and an expression of shock I had never seen in him. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you," he said with a broken voice. "It's about your daughter. It's important." What I was about to hear would completely change my perspective on the last 3 years. He sat on my couch and began to tremble visibly. "I don't know how to tell you this," he murmured. "She's been lying to me about something fundamental. Your daughter is married. She's been married for 2 years. With me, she was only going to have a fake ceremony to get money from you and my family." The world stopped. For several seconds, I couldn't process what I had just heard. Married for 2 years. Every conversation about the wedding, every tear for the perfect ceremony, every threat of cancellation. Everything had been an elaborate scam designed to extract money from 2 naive families. "She married civilly a guy named Alexander Rodriguez," Marcus continued, with tears running down his cheeks. "I discovered it by chance when I was helping her organize documents for our supposed marriage. I found the certificate hidden in her apartment. When I confronted her, she didn't even have the decency to deny it." The revelation hit me like a hammer. For 2 years, while I worked double shifts to maintain her lifestyle, while I went into debt for her whims, while I sacrificed my health and my future for her happiness, she had been living a completely separate life with another man. Marcus and I had simply been funding sources for a woman who had turned manipulation into an art form. "That's not the worst part," he continued with a broken voice. "Alexander also has money. She's been taking money from him with the same stories she told us. She tells him she needs help caring for her sick father, that she has family medical emergencies, that she's saving to buy a house where they can live together when they officially marry." Isabella had created 3 parallel versions of her life. With me, she was the devoted daughter who needed paternal support to start her marriage. With Marcus, she was the passionate fiancée who dreamed of a perfect wedding. With her real husband, she was the committed woman who struggled to stabilize her family situation before formalizing their relationship publicly. "Mr. Thompson, she played all of us," Marcus said. "For months, I thought you were selfish for not wanting to sell your mansion. I thought you didn't understand how important this wedding was for your own daughter. But now I understand that you were the only one smart enough to set limits." The irony was bitter. For months I had tortured myself thinking I had been a bad father, that I had put my financial needs before my daughter's happiness. It turned out I had been the only one wise enough to detect that something didn't add up in that whole story. 6 months after Isabella's last call, I opened my eyes one Sunday morning, and for the first time in decades, I didn't check my phone. The silence of the device no longer hurt. It had become an ally, a reminder that my life was mine again. I began healing with something simple, painting the walls that had witnessed so many arguments. Each brushstroke was an affirmation. This mansion is still my home, and I'm still its owner. After came the internal part. I enrolled in a support group for codependent parents, where I learned that love without limits is a form of slow self-destruction. With therapy came new habits. I left the night shift at the factory and accepted a part-time position at the municipal library. The salary was lower, but it gave me something immeasurable: free hours to read, walk, and sleep without anxiety. The money that used to disappear on others' whims started staying in my account. New people also appeared. Martha, the library's cultural events coordinator, invited me to an autobiographical writing workshop. At first, I hesitated. Telling my story out loud seemed like a painful repetition. However, by capturing my memories on paper, I saw them from another perspective. They were no longer proofs of failure, but chapters of learning. Martha and I began having lunch together on Thursdays. Our conversations revolved around books, homemade recipes, and music. For the first time in a long time, someone was interested in who I was, not what I could offer. Today, I can say I understand the difference between loneliness and fulfillment. Loneliness is absence of voices. Fulfillment is presence of self-esteem. I enjoy my Sundays reading on the porch. I listen to vinyl records I had stored since my youth and cook recipes my wife and I invented when we were newlyweds. I've learned that personal dignity is non-negotiable, that self-love is the foundation upon which healthy bonds are built. They say blood is thicker than water. I respond that respect is more vital than both. If someday Isabella knocks on my door ready to dialogue as an adult, I'll receive her with arms and eyes wide open, but she'll arrive knowing her father no longer annuls himself to deserve affection. Meanwhile, life continues, quiet, honest, mine.